Borax APC competency required to level 2. This means that you must write up your summary of experience, including a statement at levels 1 and 2. Some pathways allow candidates to take health and safety as a technical competency to a higher level, i.e., level 3. You need to know about relevant Borax guidance and key legislation, including how these affect your actions on site and in the workplace. You also need a strong understanding of how to work safely and to take responsibility for the health and safety of those that you have a duty of care for. There may be health and safety considerations specific to your area of practice, such as fire safety, working at height, or asbestos risk. The Borax Pathway Guide sets out the relevant knowledge, Level 1 practical application, Level 2 for this competency. However, you do not need to have experienced everything listed, as this will depend on your experience and role. This chapter will explain what you should know concerning health and safety, covering the main requirements of Level 1. Legislation. The key primary legislation relating to health and safety at work in the UK is the Health and Safety at Work etc. Act 1974. We will also discuss a wealth of secondary legislation or statutory instruments which provide further sector-specific legislation. The 1974 Act is enforced by the Health and Safety Executive (HSE) alongside local authorities. It requires employers to, as far as is reasonably practicable, ensure employees' health, safety, and welfare at work. This includes staff training, welfare provision, safe working environments, and the provision of information, which is reflected in the Borax guidance that we will discuss later in this chapter. If an employer has more than 5 employees, they must have a written health and safety policy. An employer's breach of the 1974 Act constitutes a criminal offense and can lead to an unlimited fine or up to 2 years imprisonment. A director or manager can also be liable for their company's breach if it was committed with consent or through neglect. An employee can also be held personally liable if they intentionally or recklessly interfere with or misuse anything provided concerning health and safety. The Workplace Health, Safety and Welfare Regulations 1992 apply to most workplaces, apart from construction sites or involving construction work, and cover various health and safety issues, such as ventilation, workstations, falling objects, and windows. The Corporate Manslaughter and Homicide Act 2007 was a seminal piece of legislation defining the criminal offence of corporate manslaughter or corporate homicide in Scotland. This is where the actions of a company, for example, management failure, lead to a gross breach of their duty of care and the death of an employee or contractor. The penalties include an unlimited fine, imprisonment and disqualification of a member or senior management team members as a company director or directors. Surveyors must also be aware of the Occupiers Liability Act 1957 and 1984. The 1957 Act confirms that the occupier or a landlord in control of premises must take reasonable care to ensure the reasonable safety of visitors who have implied or expressed permission to be there or a legal right of entry. The level of care depends on the nature of the visitors, so a much higher duty is owed to children and skilled visitors who should be aware of the risks and measures to prevent harm. Under the 1957 Act, adequate warnings and signage may discharge the liability if they enable visitors to remain reasonably safe on site. The 1984 Act applies to trespassers rather than visitors. Trespassers are not invited onto a property, and their presence is unknown and not consented to. The 1984 Act applies where the occupier or a landlord in control of premises is aware of the danger and has reasonable grounds to believe that a trespasser may come into the vicinity of this danger. A common duty of care is established to take reasonable care for trespassers, although this is a lower duty of care than is owed to visitors under the 1957 Act. While the 1957 Act permits claims for death, personal injury and property damage, the 1984 Act only permits claims for the first two, i.e., not for property damage. Another essential health and safety issue that surveyors must be aware of is asbestos. Simply put, asbestos kills, so we must be mindful of the risks to advise our clients diligently and keep ourselves and others safe on site. Asbestos is a naturally occurring hazardous material, a fibrous mineral silicate, and harmful to health. If disturbed, it releases fibers into the atmosphere, which, if inhaled, can lead to asbestosis, a form of cancer. Asbestos comes in three forms: crossidolite blue, mosaic brown, and chrysotile white. Blue and brown asbestos were banned in the UK in 1985, whilst white asbestos was finally banned in 1999. Asbestos was historically used in many building materials. If a building was constructed pre-2000, you should always assume that asbestos may be present. Common asbestos-containing materials (ACMs) include acoustic plaster, adhesives, ceiling tiles, cement pipes, decorative plaster, ducting, fire curtains and doors, fireproofing, pipe insulation, roof felt, textured paints such as Artex and coatings, vinyl floor tiles, wallboard. Regulation 4 of the Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012 imposes a legal duty to manage asbestos if it is present or presumed to be present. The duty holder under the regulations will either be the owner, for example, of vacant premises, or occupier, for example, a tenant with an FRI lease, responsible for repairing and maintaining commercial premises and the common parts of domestic premises. In multi-let properties, the duty may be shared between both parties. Where a managing agent is instructed, the landlord duty holder cannot delegate their statutory duty to manage asbestos. However, the landlord can claim, contractually or in tort for a non-contractual duty, against the managing agent if any action or inaction contributes to the landlord's failure to comply as a duty holder. The managing agent will also have a duty to manage asbestos risk under the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974. If the landlord is absent, the duty holder may acquire additional duty holder responsibilities, as they may be considered to be in charge of the property. Where the duty to manage under Regulation 4 does not apply, a duty arises under Sections 2 and 3 of the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974 to minimize the risk of asbestos in domestic premises. The Defective Premises Act 1972 in the Homes, Fitness for Human Habitation, Act 2018 also emphasized this duty in domestic premises. In the event of a substantial breach of the regulations, the penalties include an unlimited fine and up to 2 years imprisonment. If a property is suspected to contain asbestos, it is a legal requirement to commission an asbestos survey and report. This will identify and record the location, amount, and type of any ACMs. A management plan should then be prepared to state how the risk of any ACMs present will be managed, including an asbestos register recording the location and condition of the ACMs. This will be used to manage ACMs during everyday occupation and use. Appropriate action should be taken to manage, repair, or remove the asbestos in line with the survey and report. The asbestos register should be updated annually or more frequently if the risk of deterioration of the ACMs is high. The management plan should be reviewed every 6 months or after refurbishment, change of use, or changes in company procedures. The management plan and register should be provided to anyone inspecting or working on the property. However, if the premises are to be refurbished or demolished, then a refurbishment/demolition survey will be required. If asbestos needs to be removed, it will be categorized as licensable, higher risk, for example, work involving loose-fill insulation or asbestos millboard, or non-licensable, lower risk, for example, maintenance work involving asbestos cement products, or asbestos-containing vinyl floor tiles. A complete list is provided on the HSE website. For licensable asbestos, an HSE licensed contractor must be used and the work notified using an ASB5 form at least 14 days before work start. To remove non-licensable asbestos, contractors do not have to be licensed. However, they must use suitably trained workers to carry out the work. Some non-licensed work must, however, still be notified to the HSE, such as minor, short-duration work involving asbestos insulating board or insulation. Contractors must be placed under health surveillance by their GP, and written records kept of the work. ACMs must be disposed of at an Environment Agency licensed asbestos site in all cases. Surveyors must be familiar with the Borax Guidance Note Asbestos, Legal Requirements and Best Practice for Property Professionals and Clients, 4th edition. This confirms that all surveyors should have undertaken asbestos awareness training, as per Regulation 10 of the Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012. Other important health and safety issues to be aware of, particularly concerning property management, include Lifting Operations and Lifting Equipment Regulations 1998. This requires lifting equipment to be kept in a safe condition, safely positioned and installed and used safely. Smoke-free premises and enforcement regulations 2007. This bans smoking in substantially enclosed workplaces and public places. The regulations also require no smoking signage to be displayed in these places. Legionnaire's disease. This is a potentially fatal form of pneumonia caused by Legionella bacteria, released into the air by purpose-built water systems, for example, air conditioning systems, evaporative condensers, and hot tubs. Employers or those in control of premises must ensure that a specific risk assessment is carried out and systems are maintained correctly. This could include keeping water temperatures between 20 degrees Celsius and 45 degrees Celsius and regularly servicing systems. The Construction Design and Management Regulations 2015 (CDM) are a key piece of legislation for all surveyors to be aware of. They aim to improve health and safety standards, management and coordination in the construction industry. CDM applies to all construction work on non-domestic and domestic properties. There are various roles defined under CDM, Figure 5.1. Under CDM, work is notifiable to the HSE via an F10 if it lasts over 30 days and has over 20 workers simultaneously working at any point, or exceeds over 500 person days of construction work. If a project is not notifiable, then the requirements of CDM still apply in full. Section 11 of the Landlord and Tenant Act 1985 sets repair standards for residential property leased for less than 7 years. This relates to the structure, exterior, main services, supplies, sanitation, heating and heating water. The Housing Health and Safety Rating System (HHSRS) was introduced by the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, England, Regulations 2005 to meet the requirements for assessing hazards under the Housing Act 2004. The HHSRS is a risk-based evaluation tool that local authorities can use to identify and manage health and safety risks in rented residential property. For example, damp, mold, excessive cold, overcrowding, slip and trip hazards, faulty gas appliances, fire risks, and dangerous electrical installations. The most serious hazards, for example, leaking roofs, rats, or broken steps, are allocated a Category 1 rating and pose a serious threat to the health and safety of occupants and visitors. The local authority must take enforcement action concerning these hazards, such as hazard awareness notices, improvement notices, emergency remedial actions, prohibition orders, and demolition orders. The Gas Safety Installation and Use Regulations 1998 require landlords to keep gas pipework, appliances, chimneys, and flues in a safe condition. A gas-safe registered engineer must undertake annual gas safety checks. The tenant must be given a copy before moving in, and subsequent checks must be provided to existing tenants within 28 days. The Electrical Safety Standards in the Private Rented Sector, England, Regulations 2020 apply to residential lettings, including assured short-hold tenancies, ASTs, and houses in multiple occupation, HMOs. Figure 5.1 CDM roles. Electrical installations, including fixed wiring, but not portable appliance testing, must be inspected, and an Electrical Installation Condition Report (EICR) must be provided by a competent person, for example, an electrician registered with NICEAC and/or Alexa, every 5 years. Landlords must give this to new tenants before the start of their tenancy, and to existing tenants within 28 days of the inspection. The penalty for non-compliance is a maximum fine of £30,000. Local authorities can also serve enforcement notices, carry out required work, and recover the cost from the landlord. Borex Guidance. All surveyors must be familiar with the Borex Guidance Note, Surveying Safely, Health and Safety Principles for Property Professionals, 2nd edition. This provides best practice and highlights the corporate and personal responsibility to ensure that high standards of health and safety are maintained in the workplace. A key concept introduced by the Guidance Note is that of the safe person. This means that a surveyor must assume responsibility for their own safety, the safety of colleagues, and the health and safety of others in the workplace. The guidance note confirms that Borax-regulated firms must provide a safe working environment, safe work equipment, safe systems of work and training to ensure that staff are competent. Staff must use these safe systems and equipment to protect themselves and others on site. This could include being provided with and wearing adequate and well-fitting personal protective equipment, PPE, under the Personal Protective Equipment at Work Amendment, Regulations 2022. The provision of PPE applies to both employees and casual workers, known as LIM, A and B workers respectively. This includes steel-toed and soled boots, high-vis jackets, safety helmets, hard hats, and gloves. The specific PPE required will depend on the work environment. Regulated firms must carry out risk assessments in relation to the office, workplace, and sites that surveyors may visit. Surveyors must also carry out risk assessments before visiting or inspecting a site or property. On site, a dynamic risk assessment should be continually undertaken as the situation may be different or change on the day, and the surveyor's actions or activities may be modified as a result. An example of this could be a dog on site, which the surveyor needs to ask to be contained in a separate room, or an unsafe loft ladder or limited access, which the surveyor cannot use or access safely. Risk assessment involves assessing what could cause harm so that sufficient precautions can be taken to prevent harm. A hazard is defined as something which may cause harm. A risk is the likelihood of the harm happening. Risk assessment usually involves the following steps. Identify the hazards. Identify who may be harmed and how they may be harmed. Evaluate the risks and decide on precautions to be taken. Record the findings and implement them. Review and update the risk assessment regularly. Advise those affected by the outcome of the assessment and methods of work or other control measures necessary to minimize or eliminate risk. Candidates should also be familiar with the hierarchy of risk control. This involves the following: eliminating, redesigning the activity or substituting a substance so that the hazard is removed. For example, using a drone to avoid working at height. Substituting, replacing the materials used or the proposed work process with a less hazardous one. For example, using pre-prepared components rather than cutting on site. Engineering controls, using equipment or engineering controls to manage risk. For example, using work equipment or other measures to prevent falls, or separating the hazard from operators by enclosing equipment. Administrative controls, identifying and implementing procedures to work safely. For example, reducing the need for lone working or ensuring that work is undertaken in daylight. Using PPE, only acceptable if the aforementioned measures cannot be used. For example, emergency alarms could be provided where lone working cannot be avoided. Firms will also need to carry adequate insurance, such as employer's liability, covering claims by employees who are injured or become ill at work, and public liability, covering claims by the public for personal injury or property damage insurance. Regulated firms must lead on health and safety compliance from the top, with clear written policies and procedures. All candidates should ensure that they read these and can discuss them at their interview. Specific issues which might be raised in company policy include providing a safe place of work relating to ventilation, heating, lighting, and welfare facilities, minimizing risks relating to monitors and workstations, personal protective equipment, manual handling, first aid, reporting of injuries, diseases, and dangerous occurrences regulations Ritter, 1995, safe electrical systems, control of substances hazardous to health regulations 2002, asbestos, fire risk assessment, working hours, H&S induction, driving, stress, lone working. Lone working is an issue which is essential to manage. In 1986, Susie Lampla, an estate agent, went missing after going to meet an unknown client. Firms and surveyors need to be aware of the risks of lone working. If it can be avoided, then it should be in line with the hierarchy of risk control. If it cannot, then these are some precautions that surveyors can take. Taking a charged mobile and personal alarm. Planning an escape route. Implementing a callback system with the office, for example, a safe word. Making a daily schedule available to colleagues. Being careful in roof voids and when using ladders. Parking your car close by and keeping your keys on you. Making sure you know who you are meeting. Following your gut instinct. Understanding the site rules for construction sites. Being aware of aggressive occupants and dogs. Informing others of any medical conditions. If in doubt, however, always withdraw from the situation or inspection. You can always return later with a colleague, or when the problem has been resolved, or you can record a limitation in your report or client advice. If you are asked to inspect a site alone, and you are concerned, take a stand and refuse, report this internally, and only inspect if you feel it is safe. Your safety and life are at risk, and this is far more important than any piece of work, project, or instruction will ever be. Working at height is one of the leading causes of injuries and fatalities, including falling from ladders and walking on fragile roof coverings. The key legislation in this respect is the Work at Height Regulations 2005. Risk assessment is required before any inspection involving working at height. This includes considering the height required, duration of the inspection, frequency of inspection, and the roof or surface condition. Applying the hierarchy of risk control, working at height should be avoided where possible, for example using a telescopic pole and camera or a drone instead. If working at height cannot be prevented, then action to prevent falls should be taken and the risk of a fall minimized. This could involve installing a guardrail, anchor points, attached to a safety harness, using a fall arrest system, scissor lift, ladder or tower scaffold. Scaffolding should ideally be tagged and dated after inspection, confirming it is safe. Ladder safety is something that all surveyors should be trained in. The Home Survey Standard, which applies to residential level 1, 2, and 3 surveys, confirms that a ladder, at least 4 meters long, can be used to inspect flat roofs and loft spaces where the access or hatch is no more than 3 meters above ground or floor level. The top section of the ladder should extend 1 meter above where the surveyor steps off the ladder. The condition of a ladder should be checked before each use. If the ladder is telescopic, care should be taken to ensure that each extendable section is locked into place securely before use. The HSE website provides excellent additional guidance on ladders. Finally, the boards published a guidance note on health and safety for residential property managers, first edition. This covers a wide variety of compliance areas for residential property, which tend to be more onerous than commercial premises due to the more intensive use, including occupiers sleeping and living in the property. A managing agent's obligations for a residential block will depend on the type, age and size of the block, the tenancy agreements in place, and the individual nature of each tenant or leaseholder. For long leasehold apartments, a service charge is typically paid by the leaseholders concerning the management and repair of the block's common areas. The freeholder, who may pass this liability to their managing agent, is responsible for the common areas using the service charge funds. The individual leases will define the service charge regarding common area services and apportionment. The freeholder or managing agent is generally responsible for health and safety in the common areas, but not the internal parts of the apartments or flats, as they are in the control of the leaseholder. The freeholder could let the apartments or flats directly on assured short-hold tenancies in a multi-let block. The maintenance liability remains with the freeholder rather than being passed on to the tenants. In this case, no service charge will be operated for the block, and the responsibility for the health and safety of the whole block will fall to the freeholder or managing agent. Candidates in the construction industry may need accreditation under the Construction Skills